して、ゴールドラフトリサーチラボ CEO のアラン・バーナード博士にご講演いただきます。ご講演にもございますが、この講演は逐次通訳となります。それではよろしくお願いいたします。
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor to be here today. Thank you very much to the sponsors, to Daiwa House, Fujitsu and MediaTek for the invitation to share some new insights into improving our own productivity today. It truly is an honor to work with such legendary companies as Daiwa House, Fujitsu and their clients. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some of the insights that we have gained over the last 20 or so years that I have been applying theory of constraints myself. I had the great privilege of working directly with Dr. Eli Goldratt for over 20 years, of which the last 10 years was really special when we started the Goldratt Research Labs with a mandate of developing new knowledge within theory of constraints and also searching for new applications of theory of constraints. In 2004, I started a research project that ended up being the title for my PhD. And the title was simply, how do we identify and unlock inherent potential within organizations and also within individuals? There were two theories that I investigated. The first one is that our potential is limited by the starting conditions that we face. These starting conditions can include the genes that we inherit from our parents, the education that we receive, even the country that we live in. But of course, if the starting conditions was really the limiting factor, what we should see in reality is that in some communities there are just no successful people. And that simply isn't true. Even in the most poverty-stricken areas, there are always people that rise up and become incredibly successful. So my PhD research investigated the second theory of what really limits us from improving. And it is not our starting conditions, but our starting assumptions. A good quotation about starting assumptions and the impact of starting assumptions is the famous quote by Henry Ford, when he said, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are right. Of course, when we start a new initiative, we simply don't know whether we can or whether we can't. But it's still more useful to believe we can, because at least then we will try. So it was this passion of mine that really attracted me to theory of constraints, which seemed to simply try to apply the scientific method to what was previously considered the art of managing and improving organizations, by focusing on the assumptions that are limiting us from improving organizational and management productivity. I soon realized that there is no such thing as good or bad assumptions. There are simply assumptions that are useful, that help us to achieve our goals and those of our organizations. And then there are assumptions that limit us, that actually hurt us from achieving our goals. So it's useful to understand which are useful and which are not. When you investigate the performance of organizations, whether from the private or the public sector, there is, of course, many differences between public and private sector. But the one thing that is in common is the incredible pressure to do more with the same in less time or with less resources. So the focus of Goldratt Research Labs is to particularly understand what makes it so difficult for organizations from the private or public sector to significantly improve their performance. So to answer that question, I would like to share with you just a quick overview about what is theory of constraints for those that are not aware of the fundamentals of theory of constraints. The second thing is how we can use theory of constraints to improve productivity, both of an organization, a process or department within an organization, but also the people that work in that company, especially management. Of course, to improve productivity, we need to know how to measure productivity. If we measure productivity by local efficiencies, it might very well be that it's driving really bad local optimization performance in an organization. So we need to understand what is the right way to measure productivity for the whole system. In the case studies section, I would like to share with you a few examples of the consequences of limiting assumptions within organizations And secondly, what happens if we can eliminate those assumptions and replace them with better assumptions. And then in the last section, I'll try to summarize again, bringing it back to our personal productivity. What limits our productivity, how can we measure it, and how can we apply some of the insights that we've learned from theory of constraints to make a dramatic improvement in our personal productivity. And by dramatic improvement, I am not implying a 5% or 10% or 20% improvement. I'm talking about a 50%, 100%, a 200% improvement in the amount of good work that we can get done within a specific time. So let's start with the first question. What problem are we trying to solve with theory of constraints? There are two things that make it difficult to improve productivity in any organization. You've achieved an improvement in the organization, and you see that suddenly the improvement is not happening anymore, or it's happening at a much slower rate than what you are expecting. And it's clear that you've hit some limiting factor, some constraint. And the question is, now what? What next? Because there's only one of three outcomes that can happen. If we do nothing, the performance will decay. We can also convince ourselves that the only potential that is remaining after so many years of efforts by very good people is diminishing returns, that the best that we can do is to keep on polishing our performance and make small marginal improvements, what Goldratt called the green curve. Then there's another curve that's possible, which is the red curve, an exponential growth in improvement or performance, a real step change compared to what we had achieved in the past. And of course, if we ask people in our organization, which of those two curves is the one that's most realistic for your area? Some people will say, look, we've improved already so much that from now on it will be small marginal improvement. So we should be setting our targets based on really the green curve. They will be setting targets based on what they think are achievable, based on the things that are in their control. Maybe a 5% improvement, or maybe a stretch target of 10% improvement. The ones that are focusing on the red curve are saying, what are you talking about? Which of these two curves best represent the population growth in the world? And of course, it's the red curve. The population are growing exponentially. So as long as we provide products or services that is satisfying demand of people, we should be setting our targets based on the red curve. And now suddenly we have disharmony and conflict within an organization. Some people are saying we have to make big changes. Now is the time to make big changes to achieve or capitalize on this growth potential that exists. But of course there's resistance, especially if these targets are considered to be unrealistic. Of course, there's also a plus and a minus of not changing. The plus of not changing is that we can maintain stability, maintain our performance at least, and not do anything that is considered to be very risky. But there's also a negative, which means that the performance gap will not be closing by itself. And many companies are simply stuck, they're almost paralyzed by this conflict. Of course, especially the companies that believe consensus from all the stakeholders are important before you take action. Because as long as you can't get agreement on whether to change or not to change, by definition you're not changing, you get stuck. This is why sometimes it's useful to have a leader that's a bit more like a dictator, that simply makes the decision and says, I will take all the risk, but we are going to be changing. Of course, that's not the solution that we want. So it's important that we understand, why do people that seem to care for the company, that have a lot of experience in the company, why do they resist change? And it's because we all know that in order to achieve an improvement, we have to make changes. Improvement is the result of changes in an organization. But unfortunately, not every change results in an improvement. So as part of my PhD research, I studied this. I said, how many of the changes that organizations make actually result in an improvement, meets the original objectives? And unfortunately, the results are not good. Whether the change is developing new products, or doing a merger and acquisition, or even a new IT system, what we know is that somewhere between 60 to 80% of all changes simply fail to achieve the results that they were expected to, and a significant part of those actually make the performance of the company worse than before they started. So in summary, this is the problem that we're trying to solve with theory of constraints. A very clear answer about what should change, what should be improved in a company, and as importantly, what should not be changed or improved in a company. Of course, if it's clear that the company already knows what to change to achieve the red curve in performance, but they are not changing, then it's absolutely critical to understand why there's resistance to change. What are the assumptions that are blocking people from adopting this new change? If top managers ask me, what is theory of constraints? I give them a very simple and short answer. It is trying to help us to differentiate between all the many things in an organization that can be improved, and I'm sure you'll agree that everything can be improved, how to differentiate the many things that can be improved from the few that must be improved to achieve the goals of the organization. So, what is theory of constraints? How does it help us to solve this problem? I had a challenge with a colleague of mine for many years on how we can summarize theory of constraints. And we started with a few pages, and then we got it down to a few paragraphs, and then we got it down to a few sentences. And then Dr. Goldberg came along and he said it can all be summarized in one word. Of course, it's very difficult to imagine that such a wide body of knowledge that has been developed over the last 30 years can be summarized by one word. Considering the problem that it is trying to solve, it's unsurprising that this one word is focus. But when you ask people, what does focus mean? Most people will say it's knowing what to do, what to change. Dr. Goldberg reminds us that focus doesn't just mean knowing what to change or improve, but as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, knowing what not to change and improve. Because focusing on everything is synonymous with not focusing on anything. So the first process that Dr. Goldberg verbalized to help us to focus is called the 5 focusing steps. And it's based on a very simple assumption that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And remember, it doesn't matter how many links there are in a chain, the strength is always dependent on just the strength of the weakest. So if you have a very simple chain that has 3 links, what theory of constraints helps us to do is to focus, to find out that actually I don't need to improve 3 links, I can only focus on 1 link. But imagine your chain has got 1,000 links. Now it's giving us incredible leverage because it's saying that, guess what? There's still only 1 link out of the whole 1,000 that's currently limiting the performance. Focus on that and at least for now, forget about the rest. So the role of a constraint or bottleneck or the weakest link is very important. But by definition, I don't know what the constraint for a system is if I don't fully understand the goal of that system. So of course, for a for-profit organization, it's very simple. The goal is to make more money now as well as in the future. But what's the goal for a public sector organization, for government? Is it to improve the quality of life of the people living in the country? So what we've learned from defining a goal for a system is it is only useful if it really helps us to decide what to focus on. So if it's so broad that it appears as if everything is important, that's probably a good sign that you haven't properly defined the goal of the system. So for example, for a health department, rather than saying that the goal is to improve the health of all citizens, which is very broad, shouldn't we rather just say that the goal of the health department is to meet the demand that's placed on it by citizens effectively and efficiently? More useful because now we can ask what is really limiting us from effectively meeting the demand, and secondly, what's limiting us from efficiently meeting the demand. So when people struggle to follow step 1, which is simply to identify the constraint or the weakest link, frequently it's pointing to the fact that they haven't really done a good job in defining the goal and the measurements for the system that they are looking at. So once we understand what is the scarce resource that is limiting us from fully meeting the demand that's placed on our system, the next step is deciding how to better exploit the scarce resource and not waste it. So if the constraint is capacity, we need to know how well are we exploiting the capacity that we do have. And if we are losing half because we're continuously starving or blocking or causing the bottleneck to work on things that are not needed now, of course it means that we could double the throughput by moving or removing those problems. If we have more capacity than demand, clearly the constraint is in the market. So now the scarce resource is the size of the market. So we should ask, how much of the market do we have? What is our market share? Maybe 5% or 10%. So before we start thinking about going into different markets or developing new products, we should ask ourselves, what's limiting us from being able to sell more or get higher prices in the market that we are already operating? Or put differently, how are we wasting our current market by not being reliable, by not being able to respond rapidly to changes from our customers? The answer to step 2 should be the strategy of the company. What are the things that we need to change in order to achieve more of our goal? Step 3 is a difficult part. It says subordinate everything to this decision about what you need to change to better exploit the scarcest resource in the system. And that basically means change only those policies or processes or measurements that's in conflict with a decision how to better exploit and not waste the system constraint. For example, if we have an internal capacity constraint and we can sell whatever we produce, it makes sense to have a policy to run very long batches. And even to dictate to clients that there's a minimum order quantity. You want to order from me, I don't accept orders anything less than 100 because it means that I will do unnecessary setups. However, that same rule that's so good when a constraint is capacity really doesn't make any sense when a constraint is in the market. Because forcing a client to order 100 when they only need 20, maybe we not only lose the client, but we lose a lot of capacity for the whole supply chain, producing things that is not needed now, and as a result creating the impression that we have an internal bottleneck. Of course, getting rid of all these areas that we are wasting the constraint is not always good enough to achieve the goal. If the goal is even higher, only then do we need to elevate the system constraint, which means now go and get more. This might mean get more machines, get more trucks, get more salespeople, get different suppliers, get a different investor because we've run out of cash. But the rule is always exploit first what you have before you elevate, before you ask for more. But as I mentioned, this is not such an easy question to answer because when people are producing things that are not needed, it can create the impression that they have become a bottleneck. And as a result, we immediately jump to adding resources when in fact the real leverage is just to get the little bit of capacity that we've got to stop producing things that are not needed now. So step 5 includes a warning. It says if a constraint has been broken in the previous step, be careful. Don't let inertia, maintaining the status quo, become the constraint. Go back to step 1. But Dr. Goldrat added another part to the warning in step 5, only more recently. He said, be very careful. If a constraint moves, you have to change the rules. So like assumptions, you don't get good rules and bad rules. You just get rules that help me better exploit or elevate the constraint, and then those that are in conflict with better exploiting or elevating the constraint. So he said, be very careful. Of course, you can achieve the growth by following these 5 steps, but it will continuously jeopardize the need for stability. Because every time the constraint moves, either to the market or to suppliers or to cash, you have to change rules. And that's what is causing the instability in the organization every time we have to change rules. So he recommended that actually we replace step 1 with not identify the system constraint, but to decide where we want it to be. And design a system that will keep it there. So we never have to change the strategy for the organization. You see, McDonald's have designed their whole strategy, not based on a constraint that is moving all the time, but the assumption that the constraint for them will always be the number of clients that walk into their shops wanting to buy their products. And that the whole organization should be always subordinated to that. And never allow that their own capacity of the griller or the teller becomes a constraint. They want to keep that constraint in one place and design a strategy to keep it there. So in summary, identify the goal and define the constraint and see how big the gap is that's available for better exploitation. And step 3 is about understanding those conflicts that are blocking us from changing the rules and resolving those conflicts. And this is a part of TOC which we call the thinking processes of TOC. The thinking process is not another thing in isolation. It's used in combination with the 5 focusing steps to help us get over when we get stuck in one of these steps. This sounds all common sense. The question is, so why do organizations get this wrong? Why don't they keep enough capacity to ensure that they can reliably meet the demand on their organization? We can answer that question by understanding a little bit about queuing theory. So I have a resource and there are things arriving, customers arriving, that is demanding the resource's skills to be treated like a bank teller. And of course the resource has a processing time or cycle time. And the question is, what happens as the arrival rate starts increasing? What happens to the utilization and to the queue in front of this resource? Of course, if you have 0 customers, you have 0 queue. But if the customers arriving is more than a capacity, the queue will grow over time towards infinity. And it doesn't grow linearly, it grows exponentially on this red curve. And of course, as the queue grows dramatically, the reliability, the blue curve, will decay as dramatically. This is such a scary thing to see happen because up to about 80% utilization, it looks as if the queue is growing linearly, that the queues are very small, and suddenly just a little bit of additional demand, suddenly the queue grows very, very quickly and very large. We see this frequently with projects-based companies that for many years established themselves a credibility based on reliability. They can offer turnaround projects in 6 months. And just by adding a little bit of demand, getting some new customers, just pushes them over this threshold. And suddenly all the projects are taking 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 14 months long to complete. So why do we see many companies make this mistake? Is if their top management are thinking that an idle resource is a major waste. If that is their assumption, they will try to maximize the utilization of all their resources, pushing their resources over this critical point of 80% utilization, and almost guaranteeing that things will take much longer, that you cannot be reliable, and that you get much less done. So of course, if we want to reduce the lead time and improve our due date performance, we can do it in only one of 2 ways. We can reduce the demand, we can say no to some customers, or we can add capacity. Both of those are not desirable strategies. They are very costly. So can theory of constraints provide a very simple and eloquent solution that's not just quick to implement, but won't cost any money? It requires that we understand the problem a little bit more deeper. So why do so many organizations struggle with balancing the demand and supply? So the red curve is simply plotting cumulatively the demand on a specific department or company. So orders arriving in the system in either units or dollars. And the green curve is simply the completion rate or the throughput of that system. The horizontal difference is the lead time, the time it takes us to fulfill orders or meet demand, and the vertical difference is the amount of work in process that's stuck in the system at any point in time. So of course, you can imagine what happens if the demand is arriving quicker than what we can supply. Over time, those 2 graphs won't be balanced, they'll be unbalanced, they'll be diverging, going away from each other, and that's where this rapid exponential growth in queues and work in process is coming from. The second graph is showing what happens if we just get an increase in the demand rate, the rate at which orders arrive in our system, but even if it stabilizes after that, it goes back to the original rate of orders arriving. If we don't have catch-up capacity, the lead times will permanently increase and the work in process will permanently increase. The same phenomena can be seen in graph 3 that shows what happens if, say, for a week we had no output, no production because our factory went down, unless we have catch-up capacity, it will permanently increase the lead time and working process in the system. So to understand how we can predict the impact of changes, we need to understand the relationships between these various factors. And Little's law is a beautifully simple correlation that shows how inventory or work in process relate to throughput and lead time. For example, if I know that there's about 100 orders stuck in the system or 100 applications for licenses stuck in the system at the moment, and our lead time to process one on average is about 10 days, I can predict that my throughput rate will be about 10 per day, so 100 divided by 10. So when I investigate why the lead time is 10 days, I might find it's because the different departments are batching. And that is taking up a long lead time. So if we can stop the batching, maybe we can reduce the time to only 2 days. What will be the impact on throughput? Well, throughput will go up from 10 per day to 50 per day. So in any organization, if you have 2 of these variables, you can calculate the third. But you can also calculate the impact of changes or improvements on one of those on the others. So this is one way where we can release a lot of capacity very quickly just by reducing the lead time, the time it takes us to complete things. But there's another way, and the dice game is a beautiful way that Dr. Goldrat invented to help us understand about why the performance of most companies is well below the performance of the bottleneck in that company. So here you have a simple factory with 5 machines. The output per day for each machine is determined by the throw of the dice between 1 and 6. So on average, each machine can do 3.5 per day, or over a 20-day period, it means that they should be able to do 70 in a month. So as shareholders, we bought machines that should be able to do 70 in a 20-day period. The question is, if we ran this factory, how much will it actually produce? Most people are shocked to find out that a factory like this cannot produce much more than 35, or about half of what we expect. Of course, you need to play the game to experience it, but you can see just logically, if A throws a 1, it doesn't matter whether B, C, D, and E all threw 6s, only 1 will go through the system. And it even doesn't matter if A, B, C, and D all throw 6s, because if E throws a 1, only 1 will come out of that factory for that day. So what we learn from this very simple game is that the output of the system cannot be more than the output of the bottleneck, but it is often significantly less than the output of the bottleneck. And now the question is, so where's the constraint in the system? Well, it seems to be moving all the time. So what should I do? How do I even apply step 1? So I'm going to show you what we can do to dramatically increase the performance of this little factory. But it is very counterintuitive. For example, if I asked you what would happen if I reduced the capacity of one of the machines, you would say, of course, the capacity of the system must go down. So we select a resource, maybe C, and we reduce its capacity between 1 and 5, which means its average is now 3, no longer 3.5. And of course, our target will now change. The target will be 20 days times 3 per day, so 60. And it's very surprising that when you play the game, you find out that this factory now is very close to producing 60 most of the time, much more than 35 in the previous round. Why? Because by slowing down the bottleneck, we've actually created protective capacity or catch-up capacity in front and behind it. And they can use that capacity to ensure that the bottleneck is never starved or never blocked. So rather than put buffers everywhere, like what would be proposed by Lean or Toyota production system, we concentrate the buffer only in the area where it will bring the most output to the system, which is protecting the bottleneck from starvation and blockage. So this is by far the most effective and efficient way to create that surplus capacity that we need to catch up when we fall behind. And for those that are interested to play this game, you can either do it, of course, with real dice, etc., or you can download this app that we've created from the App Store called Goldrat's Dice Game for the iPad and the iPhone. The last part of theory of constraints I want to introduce to you is throughput accounting, which is a very simple way of quantifying the impact of changes on the financial performance of the company. For example, if we're trying to justify buying a new IT system like SAP, normally what we do is we try to do it based on cost avoidance. Over time, how many fewer resources do we need to justify a purchase price of, say, $10 million. So we'll say maybe it will save us $2 million a year, so the payback time for $10 million is 5 years. But there's much higher leverage points than reducing cost in a company. There's, of course, increasing revenue in a company. So let's, for example, think about what would happen if we could use SAP to prevent pricing mistakes that are costing the company about 1% of their revenue per year. So most people would say, well, that's not going to really help us. This company is only making 5% profit, right? So 5% of 1% of $1 billion is about $10 million. $10 million, 5% of that is only half $500,000. That's not really a big impact if we can reduce pricing mistakes. But of course, it helps if we can clearly separate variable and operating expenses or variable and fixed expenses from each other. Because then what we know is if we can prevent a pricing mistake of 1%, it means sales revenue will go up by 10 million. Variable cost doesn't change. Operating expenses doesn't change. That whole 10 million will go to the bottom line. By the way, that's also true if we just give away 1% less discount. That whole 10 million will drop to the bottom line, increasing our profit from 50 to 60 million, which is a 20% increase in net profit with just a 1% saving in not giving so much discount away. So let's see how TOC can help improve productivity for management. A few years before Eddie passed away, we started asking the question, where's the real constraint in any organization? Is it the market, is it supply, is it capacity, or is it cash? So we asked the question, what is really the scarcest resource in a company? And we came up with just one simple answer. The bottleneck is always at the top of the company. The real constraint in a company is top management. If you think about it, even the biggest companies in the world don't have a very large percentage of the total world market. So the constraint can't be the market. And as long as they have a good business case, they can always get cash to buy the capacity or the supplies that they need. So it cannot be the market or supply or cash. It has to be something else. And I'll justify now why we claim it is management, and specifically management attention. So we asked, if it's management, could it be that it's the lack of information? And we quickly realized that the available data in our systems today is a lot more than the data that we actually need to manage our companies, which means that there's a great surplus of information or data. So that can't be the constraining factor. So we asked a different question. Think about all the things that demand your attention as top management every day, all the things that could benefit from your attention, and now compare it with your available attention. And now suddenly we find out that there's a big shortage. And I'm sure you will agree with me that the number of things that demand your attention or could benefit from your attention not only exceeds your available attention from time to time, but it's always the case. It will always be more than what we've got attention to give. So I looked up the definition of attention, and there were many definitions. So like a good scientist, we just came up with one that hopefully we think is quite simple. What is attention? So my definition is, attention is the ability and willingness to do one thing at the expense of others. So that's the constraint, our limited attention. So deciding how to exploit the constraint is treating it exactly like any other constraint. We can only increase or close the gap between demand and supply by doing two things, either reducing the demand or increasing the supply. So our management systems, our information systems, should tell us what are the things that should get our attention. That will help us to focus on the right things. But of course, if the number of things that are demanding our attention is much more than our limited attention, it doesn't just help to prioritize those lists, because we'll keep on having a backlog, which means the lead times to get to everything will be much, much longer than what they need to be. So we need a different solution. So we studied what wastes our attention, and there's 3 types of errors that we make as management. We do things we shouldn't be doing. We don't do the things that we should, and we don't learn from experience. So it would be useful for you to do a little exercise and see how much of your available attention every day is lost by one of those 3 mistakes. A different way to look at how big the gap is to think about in the last week, how many hours were you able to give undistracted attention to one thing? You'll notice that we didn't say the constraint is management time because we have 8 hours or 9 hours or maybe even 18 hours a day. We said it's attention. How many hours do I have to give completely undistracted attention to the most important thing in my organization? So the question is, what is blocking us from doing it? And I mentioned it's always some kind of conflict that we are facing. So our information systems is measuring everything. It's giving us on a day-to-day basis all the performance gaps or variations that exist in our business, which results in the need to prioritize, to freeze, and even to stop doing some things because there's just too much work to do. At the same time, there's continuous pressure to keep on multitasking, to try and close all these gaps and reduce all these variances. And this technique called the change matrix cloud is simply trying to understand why we keep on facing this conflict. What's the positives of change, not change? What's the negative of not change, not change? And the assumptions that are blocking us from resolving the conflict. And what we've realized is that this mistake will keep on being made as long as top management thinks that unless they measure everything, they will miss something critical and be blamed for it. So they'll keep measuring absolutely everything in an organization, causing tremendous amount of multitasking in an organization. So that's a limiting assumption that has to be challenged for top management, that everything is important. For the middle management having to do the work, the assumption that has to be challenged is this one, which says, to be fair, I shouldn't prioritize. I should try to do everything. I can't say no. It's impolite to say no or not now. As long as that's their assumption, they will keep on multitasking. So if management attention is the constraint, it also means that they are limiting the potential profitability of the company. So to understand what management attention should be focused on, we should try to see where we are losing profits. So first of all, understand which are those variances or non-compliances that are absolutely critical to close, and focusing management attention first only on those and ignoring the rest. And then secondly, focus on the decisive competitive edges that our company needs to get customers to be willing to buy more or pay more. That should be the second thing that gets attention from top management. Only then should we be thinking about reducing avoidable costs or investments, and maybe expanding the market, adding new products or going into new markets. Of course, then we can say, well, what capabilities do we need to build or capitalize or sustain these 4 elements, and how must our IT systems be modified to help us implement these few important changes? And here's an example of another thinking process in theory of constraints called the strategy and tactic tree that we use to solve exactly this problem. What should management be focused on? What should get their attention? And what are the few critical changes that are needed to support that, so we know what modifications is needed in our IT systems? If you go to that website, harmonytoc.com, you can register for a free viewer that contains 5 strategy and tactic trees that were created by Dr. Ellie Goldberg for different types of businesses to help management identify which are the fewest possible changes they need to focus on to get a step change improvement in growth, stability, and harmony for their type of organization. So before I summarize, there's one last mistake that I want to focus on quickly. We've mentioned 3 mistakes, but there's another type of mistake. This is doing the right things wrong. You see, we say pay attention because we realize that there's a benefit and a cost of giving our limited attention to something or someone. Of course, if we find it difficult to decide where to give our attention, we multitask. And the question is multitasking the best way of dealing with demand that exceeds our supply? So here are 3 simple projects that take up our time. They're 20 days long each, 20 tasks of about a day each, and each task, probably we could do it in about a half a day, but we've given ourselves a bit of safety, 1 day per task. So in total, these 3 projects should take 20 days to complete if we had different people working on them. But if it required the same resource, the question is how to do them. of course, if we think it's unfair to prioritize, we'll end up multitasking. And our plan will look something like this. That it should take about 60 days to complete these three, giving them equal attention. What would have happened if we had decided as a plan not to multitask is we could have completed them like this, still taking 60 days in total. But of course, you can notice that the blue project, the highest priority project, we would have completed in 20 days, whereas if we were multitasking, that also will take 60 days to complete. So what would happen if we multitasked in reality? Of course, we'll lose time as we're switching from one thing to the other thing, as we get distracted, and it ends up taking much longer, typically 90 days. Whereas if you play the simulation game, you realize when you don't multitask, you can complete it easily in about half that time, 45 days, or the equivalent of, say, 45 seconds if it was a simulation game. And as a result, you probably find that you could have done it in about 25% less of the time than what you had even planned to do. Also imagine the impact on cash flow. When we are multitasking, we have to take out all the cash at the beginning. We have to wait all the way to the end before we can get the return. If we don't multitask, we only have to pay for the first project. We can get the return and use that money to pay for the second and the third one. I'm sure the other speakers today will speak a little bit more about this multitasking, but just to show you the impact on net profit, if we can do it in 25% less time, our throughput will go up by 33%, which means our net profit will go up by 333% if we can just reduce the lead time of our projects by 25% by not multitasking. So the founder of Daiwa House was very right where he said management should focus on speed. If we can do things faster, meet the needs of our clients faster, that is the way to increase our profits rather than focusing on cost reduction. So of course, multitasking is not the only reason why we lose time on projects. If we don't have good priorities and don't follow the priorities, if we start without full kits, if we don't update performance or resolve issues, they will also cause delays. And that's what we believe management attention should be focused on, is removing these delays and creating mechanisms that can help the organization to identify and remove these delays in total lead time. I already mentioned how important measurements are. If we measure everything, then people will multitask and it will be difficult to figure out what's the right thing to focus on. So we make some recommendations in terms of what good measurements should look like. You can go through those criteria in your own time. In summary, they should tell us accurately the status of the system, why the system is performing at a level, or what's the cause of the status, and they should get the parts to do what's good for the whole. So cumulative flow diagrams is a very good measurement for a department because it very quickly shows if that department is meeting the demand or not, and if they're not meeting the demand, is it a demand problem or is it a supply problem? And the reason why these measurements are so important is that they have a negative impact both on management attention and profitability. If we don't have enough catch-up capacity or buffer in our companies, having too little means maximum attention is required every day. We are firefighting every day. Profits go down. Of course, there's too much capacity or buffer. So we need to figure out, and that's some of the things that theory of constraints helps us to do, is to identify how much surplus capacity, how much buffer is good enough to have the minimum management attention and give us the maximum profits. I've included some case studies in the slides. I'll just quickly go through them so that you understand what they are. This is data from the federal government in the US that shows the horrible consequences of an internal policy called spend it or lose it when it comes to budgeting. You can see the average expenditure per week is about $30 billion, and suddenly in week 52, because of this policy of spend it or lose it, suddenly the expenses go through the roof. People wasting a lot of the scarcest resource in government, which is budget, because of this stupid policy. The next case study is the success that has been achieved in Utah state government by implementing theory of constraints in the various agencies within the business. And the prime measurement that we're using there for productivity is something called QT over OE. This is quality throughput of that agency divided by the direct operating expenses of that agency. And you can see how quickly it went up after they started implementing theory of constraints up to the target that the governor had set of a 25% improvement in quality throughput over operating expenses for all the agencies. The last case study is a presentation that was done by Mazda at our Theory of Constraints conference last year. And they shared their incredible journey using Theory of Constraints to reduce the time it takes to develop new models, and how they've been able to capitalize on that by significantly increasing the profitability of the company by increasing sales and getting time to market much faster than competitors. So a summary of the key insights: if management attention is the constraint, it's absolutely critical that top management decide what they should prioritize their limited attention on and communicate that clearly to the rest of the organization. And take each of these changes and pipeline it as a series of projects, so that you are not releasing everything as soon as possible and just causing middle management to start multitasking again. These projects can be planned using critical change software called Concerto, for example, that Daiwa House, MediaTek and Fujitsu will now be offering their customers. And this software helps to eliminate those mistakes that are causing lead times to take much longer than what they can take, and provide management with dashboards to see which of the delays are still causing most of the delays in overall projects. And then the last element is we can use throughput accounting to convert the improvements that we get in lead time into what it means for the company's sales and net profit and return on investment. So I want to leave you with this one message. There's some excellent research that has been done in the field of psychology about how we as individuals can get into flow. Flow is when we are hyper-productive, when we are hyper-creative, those times when we are undistracted and we can get things done in a few hours that normally takes a few weeks. The key is to design tasks for ourselves and for our people that they are so challenging that we realize it will require our full attention to get them done, but not too challenging that they cause us to become anxious and actually paralyzed. My humble apologies for taking up a bit of extra time. I underestimated the time for the translation, but I hope it was valuable, and thank you for your attention. I know it's your scarcest resource. Thank you.